So, at the core of Bhoo 26 is Urvi Foundation's philosophy of stone-free movement, where the focus is to use as much alternative materials and techniques as much as possible, and also engage with traditional materials in a contemporary manner. So, in this regard, we'd like to have a conversation where I'll initiate, and then I'd like to hear all your perspectives on the same. So all three of your philosophies, it aligns with the stone-free movement in its approach, even though it might not completely be there, but the use of eco-friendly materials and then locally available, low-energy embodied materials, much before all these were there in the mainstream, all three of you have started practicing it. So I'd like to have each of your perspectives. Shankar sir, we'll start with Shankar sir. Sir, how did you start off in this field, and what inspired you to continue along it much before it became something that was there in the public eye?
As a student, I was not born and brought up in India, but very much later in my life, I came back to a village in central Kerala, and I didn't know the language. The language, my mother tongue, that time was Swahili. It was an African tribal language. And actually, when I came to the school in Kerala, I was nowhere because I couldn't speak the local language. I didn't have friends. I had a health issue that actually prevented me from communicating. I had bad stammering. That all led me to a very dark corner where I didn't have friends. I couldn't communicate with each other. That slowly took me to an existential world. I started thinking about, dreaming about meaninglessness of life, the whole futility of life and things like that. I started reading. And somewhere in between, I got engaged with a popular science movement. In Kerala, we have a movement called Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad, which is actually the largest popular science movement in the world. With a strength of 1 million members. I was in the 6th standard, 7th standard. And those days, as a part of taking the science and technology of the people, we used to do many things. One of it was taking the smokeless chulas out to the common man. Because those days in Kerala, firewood was the only option. It was the only fuel option for our kitchens. And take the technology and science to the common people and tell them about, look, in this chula you need to usually minimal amount of fuel wood. It will emit less amount of toxic gases, etc., etc. And later, we had this total literacy mission where I used to work with the traditional fishermen families. These poor women, go out in the morning to sell fish in the city, in Trivandrum, and they would come back very late in the evening. And we would actually start the learning, teaching process after 8 o'clock in the evening. And that was where, as a school student, I was in the 7th standard then, I could really understand what poverty is all about, what houselessness is all about the lack of basic physical needs for a house. They didn't have proper kitchen, they didn't have proper toilets, etc., etc. Much later in my life, in 1996, when Habitat 2 happened in Istanbul, I was an official delegate, Indian official delegate to that conference, where I was actually instrumental in putting 2 words into the International Habitat Agenda that talked about clean cooking space. How are you going to define the adequacy of housing? It talks about 2 critical elements. One is you need to have a clean cooking space and you need to have a clean toilet. If you don't have a clean toilet and a clean cooking space, we don't, people like me, social activists, we don't call it as a proper house. So that actually led me into architecture, where I realized that there are many people in this country who doesn't have proper houses. When I actually graduated from Trivandrum School of Architecture, when I initial degree in architecture, the houselessness was very evident. It was almost 30 years, 35 years after independence. But then I realized that houselessness, we were initially having a political agenda of roti, kapda and makan. But both ways, when we talk about roti and kapda, probably we attain self-sufficiency. But as far as makan was concerned, We didn't get anywhere. At that time, I'm talking about when Laurie Baker was alive, when he was all over us. I'm talking about early 80s where the houselessness in this country was estimated at 50 million housing units. 50 million housing units multiplied by 5 members of an Indian family, many people, many people. That means a lot of people among us didn't have proper houses. And as an architect, how could you reach out to them was my first concern. So that is why I stayed away from the government, I stayed away from cozy jobs to start this non-profit organization called Habitat Technology Group, and rest of it is history. This was the initial discussion. Thank you.
Chitra ma'am, how did you get into the alternative practice?
Well, mine is very easy. It's not like his. It's very much in the flow. And I think it also has to do with a bit of the gender. So I was born in Banaras. I also studied in Africa. I studied civil engineering. I came back and then I studied architecture in Ahmedabad. There I met my husband and then we got married and then we came to Bangalore. Like any woman, no? You have to go where the husband is working. You don't even ask that question. And anyways, I didn't have a place where I can start. So I said, okay, I'll go. So it was Bangalore. And it was extremely important time politically. The country was changing. It was socialist, like what he was doing, but it was changing into capitalist. And Bangalore was a city where much of the effect of capitalism was seen. And the government was also very happy to go ahead with it. And there was the whole population which wanted to do it. And the Bangalore Development Authority had opened up a lot more land, and people were buying land and building homes. And there was also one more thing which the government of India was doing, was called Nirmiti Kendra. So these are centers for doing construction. That's what it translates to. And because through works like Habitat Group, works and works of Laurie Baker and many people in North also, like Sanjay Prakash and others, where there was a movement of doing different kind of construction, which I ascribe to the fact that the land was cheaper. Land was sometimes 1/3 the cost of construction. So obviously you had to work at reducing the cost of construction, which is not so now. So that's a different scenario in past 30 years. But that was the reason. So we were working in the beginning with reducing cost of construction. Being Bangalore, it was quite influenced by what was happening in Kerala by Laurie Baker. And some of my early clients were also Malayalis who wanted things. But there was Laurie Baker, there was work happening at Indian Institute of Science, phenomenal work happening there, which one was learning from. Also, whatever earth block we are doing is nothing new. It's an innovation rather than we had done something new out of it. But it had already, in late 80s sometime, Bangalore made, or Karnataka Housing Board made a large housing in North Bangalore, which it called the largest mud housing in Asia. But it collapsed in 5 years because of corruption, because of bad details, etc. It collapsed. Yalanka, yeah, it's near my house. And we used to go see it, but then it failed. Imagine what the level of earth construction which is happening in Bangalore now, which is the largest, which is a city with the largest number of, we call it stabilized earth housing in the world, okay, right now. It would have happened at least 20 years ago if that housing by the government had survived. So we were working with whatever Baker was doing and whatever Institute of Science were doing, we were taking it up and designing. And wonderful thing was, it's the Bangalore people. They were open to new ideas. They were open to this mix happening rather than only follow what Baker was doing, because that didn't work in Bangalore. We can't have jalis. It's too cold to have, and many things. And bricks were getting much more expensive. Slowly we were looking at it, and we got the chance of building our own home. And though we had done a couple of projects with earth, but when we saw the soil in our site, that's when we decided we'll have a basement, because we said we should have enough earth, and where would it come from? Which was not the case. You see, earth blocks were an engineering product. It was something which you worked at Institute of Science, and how much load can it take, how good it can be at earthquake proofing, etc. So it was an engineering product to make it architectural. And our interest was that how do I get the material closest to us? Because we were otherwise getting bricks from Kerala, Mangalore, and that didn't really work out. Stone was far too expensive, and walls were thicker. Already the land cost was higher. We couldn't make that thick a wall. So this was a good material, and the idea that you do a basement so that you can get your material from below your feet and you reduce the distances from where you brought. So that was our interest, and that's how it began. And now it's very important for us that we use the soil which is found at your place of work. And that's how, and then we combined it with water, sanitation, because those are important factors. That's the crisis in the city, especially if in the peri-urban areas where new homes were being built. Electricity comes, but how do you reach water, and how do you treat wastewater? So we started looking at any built as part of a human ecosystem and not merely just a building.
Thank you, ma'am. Satya sir, how has your journey been?
I knew this was coming. So I was just waiting for them to say, and then I was wondering what should I say. But does it really matter what journey or what life has been to me? How does it help any of you? Does it really matter? Philosophically speaking. But anyway, I will not disappoint you, Shahar Bano, and I'll say it in paraphrases very quickly. Born in a very remote village, no electricity till the age of my 10th age. My family sells that particular property, moves to a nearby village between Kerala and Karnataka, incidentally. And then now we went to another place which is slightly larger, more like a pete we call it. It's also a common word here. So some 50 shops along one roadside, and houses spread here and there, here and there. So that kind of a place. Then at the end of 12th standard, didn't know what to do in life. Tried to go for medical, but I didn't have enough marks. My father said, no way he's going to give the capitation fee. Applied for mechanical engineering, got it, went to Bagalkot, stayed there for 1 week. Found it impossible to stay. Some little ragging and all happened. Just came back. And in the meanwhile, as choice number 2 had given architecture. Didn't know what architecture was. That's okay. Life takes you wherever it takes you to. So, because I got in architecture in Bangalore, came there, within 1 year, another round of frustration. I went back and told my father, I will quit this course. He said, no way you can do this, like any father in those days would. Survived the program somehow, and I should have failed in the thesis, but managed to pass. I still go on saying their names, thanks to Shankar Kanade and Sharad Padalkar. Sharad Padalkar was one of the consultants for that mud architecture in those days, if you remember. My first introduction to mud, because there's a theme, was during my thesis time. Pre-thesis, 4th year, I was introduced to heritage conservation, heritage buildings by Hampi documentation by George Mitchell and John Fritz in Hampi, an eye-opener. And then thesis, didn't want to do what the school was conventionally doing. So my faculty didn't like what I was trying to do, but I went to IISc. This is back in 1982-83. And went and spoke with the professors there. This was my first exposure of Jagadish and what they were doing at Astra in IISc. collected some of the documents they had already published in Kannada by that time and English. Applied some of them in the thesis project which I was doing called Hampi Resettlement Village. The idea was, in a way, indirectly what now Urvi would be talking about. The idea was to talk about village architecture, and the faculty said you can't do it for thesis. But anyway, finally I passed somehow. No confidence. Then, even today I'm a lot into academics and I come across a whole lot of people. For me, they are the image of what I was when I was in my architecture program. Lacking confidence, lacking hope, not knowing what to do next. And very often I do feel they are a kind of a hope. If they get the right kind of guidance, these people who think low of themselves will do great, but they need some path. Anyway, back to this. Went to do masters, Delhi, then Banaras, 1.5 years work, then I got a scholarship, went to England for my second masters. Came back, 93 beginning, joined a college in Bangalore. Didn't want to, I had worked in 5 offices by that time. So I had a lot of experience of having worked in offices. So decided not to practice, not to be a consultant at all in my life. Joined academics. But Dr. Asha Benakappa, the pediatrician whom I went to with my children, she asked us if we could design a house. I said no. She said she'd already been to Jaisim and another person by name Mallikarjun, 3 architects she had considered. She said, Satya, I have been to these 3 architects, considered not working at all. Why don't you give it a try? So then, well, one day after her clinic time, 10 o'clock in the night, I go to her house. Till 12 we sat and a scheme evolved. Well, the rest is, I don't want to go on saying, but that's also where one realized the pleasure and the success story of what we call today in our office, design by dialoguing. We have this particular approach called design by dialogue. Nothing great, these are buzzwords. Huh? You can use this word, sometimes it helps. Some people like this, design by dialoguing. In the true, it's Aristotle or Plato or J. Krishnamurti way, whatever it is. Yeah. So, 96, we started off with stone, because that was my influence of Shankar Kanade on my life. So we start off with what I would call as the fundamentals of theory of architecture we're discussing. So we start looking at light, proportion, scale, materiality, texture, open, semi-open, movement. All theory of architecture of first year is there in our architecture, even today. So start off with that, with stone and such material. 96 was the first stabilized mud block house. I always quote Chitra for giving Amarnath to me. I know. Asked her, we have an offer for a stabilized mud block house. But the very first house was very innovative. A lot of things happened in the very, very first house. It got published later on in a very small house. Yeah, but then, then continued. But we continue, even today, we continue to use mud and hollow clay block as well. Laterite and stone also, but to a lesser extent. We believe anything natural. So we make a distinction between natural materials, processed materials, and manufactured materials. Highest priority for natural, second priority for processed, and the least priority for or minimize manufactured material. This approach in terms of materiality. Designing with nature, of course, continues all along. Most of our designs are very, down to earth in another way. We are not really known for very designer kind of houses. Though people have said that some of our houses are photogenic, but we have tried to not design photogenic houses. We have tried to design houses which are more experiential, very simple plan making, very simple sections, hardly any sections happening around. Yes, there are a few which possibly do look nice in the photographs. So we never had a social media. It's only during COVID that we got into Insta page. Because I don't think most of our houses look nice, but some of them may be looking nice. That's not important anyway. Back to this, the last point. Well, you are saying it is not just architecture, philosophy and all something you said. I don't know about all that. That's what Geeta Balakrishnan wrote, I think, somewhere in one of those recent thing in Ethos. She wrote all that. And I caught her saying, what are you writing like this? One great opportunity which Laurie Baker got in, but I know Shankar sir has another opinion about that. But I'll come to that later on. I want to mention that. But one of the greatest things happened in my life was Shankar Kanade and Navanath Kanade. They were designing with very, very low budget for very simple, ordinary people in Bangalore. I also thought Laurie Baker as well designed for the so-called middle class or middle budget. So our office follows the same thing. Even today, out of any 10, more than 10, if I've been out of any 10, at least about 5, 6, 7 houses are done in under 2,000 square foot size sites. So 60 lakhs to 80 lakhs, 90 lakhs is the budget for at least half the houses we work with. Maybe another 2, 3 are in the 1 crore, little plus and minus. And maybe just 1 out of 10 could be in the 1.5 crores. And I always wonder why people with 2 crores and 3 crores don't come to us. But I tell you one thing, that's a blessing in disguise. Whole lot of alternate that we have been able to work with, you can check in the website, have been made possible by these people. And I've been more of an academician. Half the time I was not in the office. I have been a visiting professor to schools of architecture and a visiting architect to my own office. So in the process, we have been able to explore a lot of newer and newer ideas.
I'd like to know there is a gap in academia and practice. Most students, although there are certain subjects that include vernacular architecture and traditional knowledge systems, when students come into their actual profession, they follow conventional routes. Is there anything that can be done to inspire more students to take up alternative methods of practice and inspire them to?
I think what's happening is you're tending to see a large number of students and you think all of them would come out and do. But that doesn't happen. First of all, only probably 10 to 15% end up practicing. Many don't end up practicing. But I'm very confident that in India, it's the largest number which is working at alternative kind of projects, the students. And the number of them you see nowadays, even if it is around the big city of Mumbai, it's very heartening. A lot of work happening. It's very difficult for them to come out and say, I'm going to start working on this, because the academia has now taught them how to work with that. What has academia taught them? They mostly, what is symmetry, what is massing, what massing have you done in your concept or whatever, where's the massing? So it's not asking these questions. So because the professors are not geared toward teaching that, we are still teaching in a very obsolete manner. For me, I'm not so bothered about material per se, though material is very important because it's 40% of embodied energy in any building which you make. But a system of thinking is not being taught. A system of thinking for the future, especially in this era of climate change and especially after this war. How do you design buildings which will be consuming less energy? Because that's going to be the biggest problem after the war. And how are you going to design? How are you going to make, can you make still glass the same way? How much energy making glass would require? So it's a system of thinking which has to come in the academia first. So hopefully wherever Satya is going and other such places, that there will be small difference in the way of thinking. And that's how it is. I don't think you can expect a student who is just about 22 years old, especially in India, who are, I use the phrase mollycoddled till the 12th standard, and even in the college they're mollycoddled because you have to pass. So the institute wants 100% pass thing, so they pass everybody. My gripe, but that's there. So it's okay, they come out, they see it, but they also expect that they will get a mason who would know how to construct this, because they themselves don't know how to construct. So it's great to have such workshops where they're learning construction, but I think ideally the student has to spend at least 4 to 5 years learning after the college that they can do anything. They can do any kind of construction.
As the proverb goes, the shadow falls between the cup and the lip, That's the shadow between the academics and the real professional practice. When I say this, the way architecture is being taught in the college, you should actually, the academician should look at the experience part of architecture. That's unfortunately missing in the current syllabus, I always tell whenever I go for induction courses across the country, I tell the young students and their parents that you're actually blessed to become. You're one of the chosen ones. Your life is going to be full of celebrations, the life of celebration. If you can actually imbibe the positiveness, if you can imbibe the positive vibes of this profession, my dear friends, young friends, I'm telling you, life is going to be a huge celebration for you. If you can enjoy architecture, where is that experimental, experiential coefficient going is the large question that's before you. That's probably because the way architecture is being taught, I'll put it in simpler words. The pedagogic content of the syllabus is somewhere there are gaps. We talk about sustainability endlessly. To whom are we building? For what we are building? So all these how, when, context, period, the legacy, the idioms, everything has to be known to the student. They have to, kind of inject that the spirit of value-based architecture into your mind. Then architecture becomes completely different. The perception becomes very different. Earlier in my life, when I was a student, I actually used to hate Le Corbusier for one reason. He had, much earlier in his life, he had made a statement that houses are machines to live in. I hated him from that moment onwards. When I first heard this statement, I started hating Le Corbusier for that. I didn't look at his buildings because he made this statement, which, to me, houses were completely different. They were organic entities. And here is a person, a world-renowned person, was talking about houses as machines. Not acceptable to me, young mind like me. But much later in my life, when I went to the chapel called Ronchamp in France, first time in my life, I was actually experiencing what meditative architecture is all about. How could you imbibe the spirit of meditation into the interiors of church building? That was amazing, my dear friends. That experience is missing in the academic curriculum. It's very important, Academic curriculum should inject a lot of passion. Not only passion, a lot of compassion into these things. For whom are you going to build? This is quite interesting. To whom are you going to build? So, if you can find social dimensions of the housing issues in India, then you will feel that challenges are, in front of you. In architect's life, if you can face the challenges, if you can address them, I'm telling you, you will have a lot of blessings. You will have an abundance of blessings. If you can face that challenge. Even poor people, deprived people, they have also a right to get what we call as architect design houses. They have a right to get architect designed houses. That will bring a lot of not only light and ventilation, but also bits of happiness into their gloomy life. So architects, if you can look at that social responsibility, that rootedness, in cultural rootedness, then architecture will become a completely different experience. When I was growing up, before I took architecture, let me tell you a small example. When I was before I became an architect, I never thought I would become an architect. When I was growing up as a school child, in my native town, one white man, was building a strange conical, with a church building with a conical roof and all. How do you define God? You define God as the omnipresent, the omniscient, and the omnipotent. One who is very powerful, one who knows everything, and one who is present everywhere. That's how you define God. First time in my life, I'm a Hindu by my faith, but in my place we used to go to mosques, we used to go to churches to pray for little favors. So when I went into that particular building, with a white person building, for the first time, I had a humbling experience, All my pretensions were melting away. And here I was going into a space where, I could feel the presence of the Almighty, And it will, the building itself would ask you to prostrate before Him. The building itself will be a humbling experience. You know which building I'm talking about? This is one of the first buildings that Laurie Baker built in Kerala. But a church which is no longer there, That is where, as a school child, I could feel the experience architecture, the way, how the religious buildings could be built, how institutions could be built, how schools could be built. And we are talking about nothing is happening in the domain of architecture in India, I should tell you. I should put my heads down in shame when I say that, because the experiential part is completely missing. You go to Japan, you go to Tadao and those buildings, you feel entranced. I hate that material, concrete, but the building, the spatial experience, the experience that you get when you go to Tadao and those buildings, it's something very magical. You go to Frank Lloyd Wright's Gigiri Museum, it's a completely different experience. Frank Gehry's buildings, Bilbao Museum, is completely mesmerizing. The old architect, Antonio Gaudi's Sangria Familia. Why are we remembering these names? Why are we remembering this? Because they all gave us experiences. Through their architectural magical expressions of architecture, they gave us experience. That particular link is unfortunately missing in the academics. What the academicians should do, the teachers should do, is that get back the spirit of that particular architecture into the young minds, so that they get to look at the context, they get to look at the sensitivity, they'll start looking at the terrain, they start looking at the values of organic architecture, they try to look at the shades that the trees are building, look at the variety of leaves and flowers and what nature offers you. If you can find happiness in that, I'm sure you will find happiness much later in your life building houses. Houses should not be built in cement and concrete. It should be built out of love and affection. It should be a domain of happiness. If you can give that spirit to the children at that level, at the college level, life is going to be very beautiful. And I'm telling you, you are blessed because of one reason. You're in India. You're in India. Where else can you? I got my master's from Birmingham and place like that, where probably if I remained in England, I wouldn't have any chance to reach out. Here there's a land which gives you immense opportunities, potential to reach out. So many terrains, so many landscapes, so many mindscapes, so many challenges, so many sensitivities to be this thing, so much of variety of context. My dear friends, where else? Where else? When you find the legacy of vernacular architecture, the academic teachers should fill these young minds, young fertile minds with that kind of spirit. And I'm telling you, life will become so beautiful. Is that experiential coefficient, that academic, beyond the academic understanding, the sensitivities, the values, that needs to be taught to the students. That's my take on basic gap between the academics and the real professional practice.
Satya sir, in short?
In short, 4 points. 1. This is a little difficult to accept, but the kind of architecture that we all end up consulting, practicing is also an inside call. I met somebody in Bangalore, who told me one day that his first building was done with stabilized mud block. Also second, I think, or something like that. Then asked him, why didn't you continue? He told something, but the point is, he was not made to continue working in that direction. That was as simple as that. Come across many other people who have said, in those days, suddenly when mud architecture was getting popular in Bangalore, especially the 90s, Chitra outlined the time of the Bangalore timeline for you. 90s was the time when most of the 80s were in a way a starting time, but 90s. So many people tried, but not everybody continued. So it's an insider call. Second, a lot of things happen with, at least with the youngsters, which is that first office you work with, or which is the first project you get to work with. Ask Chitra, she will tell, so many other people who worked at Biome today are continuing the legacy of mud architecture. So many people who worked with Jaisim are continuing the legacy of hollow clay blocks. So, this happens around because the first office that we work with does create an influence for us. I worked in 5 offices, I said, but coincidentally my first office was Canada's. So, that way that influence was there with me. Third, incidentally, in the last decade, if we may say so, I keep track of generally what's happening around, try to find out who's doing what around in whatever way I can. In the last decade or so, a large number of younger firms have started working with the alternate design with nature in South India. Tamil Nadu, Kerala and Karnataka, so many more firms now, and many of you belong to that generation here. Many of you. So there is a big future in this, in my opinion. Absolutely, I'm confident about it. I'm not trying to say everybody will walk the alternate path. No. For that matter, if you notice in a place like Bangalore, which I'm more familiar with, if we say 1% of the practicing architects are into the alternate, I'm just giving some number. It could be also 50%, which everybody will say no, but I'm saying 1%. If let's say 1% of Bangalore architecture are designed, formally designed, professionally built architecture, I'm referring to. Of that, if 1%, 2% is alternate, and if 2% of the consultants or builders are into the line, maybe more than 2% are now joining that line among the graduates. At least in this part I know about. So it's picking up. The gap as such is there for varied reasons, will not go in today.
Do you think anything needs to be done so that alternative architecture, especially earth architecture, can be scaled up? I know Satya sir has like a controversial opinion.
Not a controversial one, just my opinion.
Yeah.
Well,
because wouldn't it be better for the world if more of such architecture was practiced as opposed to resource intensive and high energy embodied construction? Construction is the largest.
I don't know. Well, I just say it and then pass the mic. I'm sure others have different opinion. With whatever little spiritual, philosophical, introspective, contemplative kind of a background I have in my life, I strongly feel that this whole idea of scaling up, making it larger, becoming bigger, growing, all these come at a cost. What happens organically? Of course, yes. But what happens consciously? Well, my mind says no. Every way I say no to that. But then somebody may ask, but how does the organic growth happen without people knowing that you are available? Well, I don't know. How does a plant, a seed which is in the ground, I found out the name, what does that Urvi Kasa mean? So, Kasa means seed, I believe. How does the seed in the ground know when to grow? Of course it knows when there is rain and water, isn't it? So, over the years now, one is increasingly becoming philosophically against the idea of consciously promoted, mooted growth of any kind. It will not survive for too long. It may be a controversial statement to say that. Yes, at that level, yes. But if one has that inclination, the desire, interest, whatever else you may say, inspiration, instructions, etc., opportunities, we need not do anything. It just happens.
I would add to that, it was Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the nation, who said, whatever you have to build with should be sourced from a 5 kilometers radius of the proposed site. He called it Swaraj, the foundation stone of Swaraj. What he meant was local availability, local should be the mantra. There is technologies, capabilities or materials. Local should be the mantra. And again, let me reiterate my statement. Where else in the world we have such a beautiful vocabulary of building materials? Here sitting in God's own country, very huge variety of most beautiful building materials on earth. We have laterite, we have good clay, good earth to work with. Where else in the world can you get such a beautiful vocabulary of building materials? And also let me add to that, I'm working across the world. And let me tell you that the labor capabilities are probably the best in the world now. The labor capabilities of the artistry of Indian masons or carpenters, I think they're the best. We don't have the machines, but the artistic hands, we have very blessed hands that way. So the local capabilities are there, local building material vocabulary is there, and local technologies has to be done. That is what people like Naseef through Urvi Foundation is doing. Mud is there. How do you upgrade it? How do you update the knowledge on mud so that It is more, mud is basically, you should understand that don't have a romantic notion about such material. They have scientific limitations. You have to understand that. The whole exercise of this particular workshop is to get you exposed to the capabilities, potential and promise of the material and the limitations. The engineering limitations also you should understand. So once you understand the material, once you get the feel of the material, the versatility of the material comes to your hand, comes to your senses. That is what mud is all about. We talk about mud because it's such a versatile building materials. The plasticity, the durability, the life of, the strength of the material. You will actually feel it once you touch mud, how workable it is, the plasticity, the basic versatility of the material comes to your hand when you start touching it. That touch is very important. When you talk about, when you talk about a vocabulary of building materials, that will probably make the building look better. Why do you use mud? To me, the color is very intoxicating. It really intoxicates you. It has got a magical render. The texture, even the smell of mud is very good. When you feel mud, it's very good. That's why people like me, architects, like to build in mud. But beyond that, there are many determinants. That is what is important in the Indian context. We look at cost efficiency beyond the romantic notions of mud. We look at the cost efficiency, you try to have an energy audit on the materials, try to find it out yourself, whether it's suitable for a particular land and things like that. The whole idea of this workshop, I hope, is to initiate discussions. We should talk to each other. We should talk to the materials. We should feel the materials. And then a conversation happens. Once a conversation starts happening, you start questioning. When you start questioning, you're on the way to discoveries. You're on the way to creative innovations. That's what the journey is all about. So I think beyond the romantic notions of material, beyond these things, you should have, the feel of the material and the understanding of the material, and that will take you forward. Today, somebody was talking about the 3D printing, new technology, how that can be incorporated into the traditional vocabulary of building. Technology is important, local capability is important, but now the skill sets are diminishing, and how do you address that? Is a major question. That's what, through paints, through bricks, through all kinds of beautiful expressions of architecture, people like Urvi, people like us are combining to face this particular issue. Thank you.
So what can be done to scale up earth architecture and the challenges? Now, like I keep saying, that Gandhi said from 5 kilometer radius, I'm beyond Gandhi. Huh? I said, below your feet. That's a joke, okay? Nothing. But let's say that it's below your feet. So how much would you get? Mostly what we have done, our calculations in the houses we've done, is that you get enough earth for almost 3 homes. A basement you make, you get enough earth for 3 homes. So that's one possibility. That means from that earth in that city, you can make 3 homes. That's it. Of, let's say, 135 square meters or 150 square meters, 3 homes. But what does the city do? It's making millions of square feet. And we don't have the earth. Or it starts saying, where does that material come from? Earlier, when they were making bricks, it used to be from the nearby agriculture land. You take out the earth, you burn the bricks, you leave the land. Not even weed grows in that land after the brick making is over. That's how bricks were made in and around Bangalore. Or let's say when you make concrete blocks, you have removed the whole hill. In fact, there's this beautiful housing in Bangalore called Jalvayu Vihar. It's beautiful, it's lovely. It's all of stone, but a nearby hill was the material source for it. the whole hill is gone, which is okay, because that's what's needed. Yeah? We need housing. We need to build with that. What we think in this architecture sphere is that we can influence these things. We cannot. Because we have to work with the polity. Where is the policy which says you only make with earth? That's when it will scale up. I don't think the government even understands. We tried working with Bangalore BMC, Bangalore Metropolitan Road and whatever that, the bus guys, and we could just make 3 projects of earth. It was so difficult because there is a need of a tender, and then you have to get a material, and the vendor should be available, and that's not there in the bill of quantities. Now, what is that? Rate, schedule of rates by PWD. It's not there. The contractor doesn't know how to then give you the rates, and then he complains, and then he cannot get the rate back, etc., etc. So to scale, it's not enough just with one architect or the possibility. The possibility will happen with policy change. It will happen with the change in terms of the planning happens. Why are we giving such high FSIs and FARs? When you give such high FSIs and FARs, everybody wants to then build taller. And with taller, obviously this earth blocks won't work. They're much heavier. It doesn't work at all. So things won't work. So you need a combination of governance, policy to scale this. But you have to really know where is this material coming from. If it's going to come from some other hill and then it comes to your place and you say it's earth architecture, it's nice that people are manufacturing blocks. Now people manufacture blocks, people build with it, and they say that's earth architecture. So maybe a Luddite who will say, no, I want to take it out from my own land and I want to work with that kind of soil and then do it. But that's not happening. So it's also scary in terms of when you talk about earth architecture, where I know in Hyderabad, earth comes from Bhuj. Poor Gandhi must be feeling horrible. It comes from Bhuj to make rammed earth. That should not happen. That requires that the person, the architect, also knows science of earth, what you guys were doing. Will this work? How should I modify that soil for it to work? And should not be wearing these glasses that it should look like this. It should look like that rammed earth also. It should look like what is the soil there. That understanding. That's where the scaling will happen, when you know the soil and when you have governance.
So for change to happen, it has to happen at a policy level, and also mindless expansion doesn't actually benefit anyone, because the core idea of earth architecture is that we get it from our surroundings. So it's a use of locally, yes, earth. So I think we are almost out of time. Should we open up the floor to questions? We can have 2 questions.
So my question is, in my mind, there is a philosophy called, we can't change the system, but then through architecture, we can change the system by providing the space and all. Through that space, we can change the system. As a student, I'm thinking about that. But in practical, as a doing a work experience and going through all these practical works, how do you think about that? Shankar sir?
I'm very pleased at your question because of 2 reasons. The way you were trying to articulate your concerns, and you're also confident about it. You have certain convictions in you that through architecture you could change the systems. It's a very beautiful concept in the sense. It's promising. It's promising in the sense you're still daring to dream. The reality may be probably different, but at your age, you're still a child to me. You're daring to dream. That's very important. The system can be very, very rigid, cruel, but you should always strive to change the system. I'm telling you. Through architecture, I think you can change the system. This is what I call as politics of architecture. Nobody agrees to me when I talk about politics of architecture. You should take a stand on this. It's very difficult to make a choice. Where do you want to stand? Whether you want to have value-based architecture in your life, talk about truthfulness and honesty, whether you want to compromise on your ideals by doing all kinds of buildings. You can do commercial building on one side, most unsustainable building on one side, and doing sustainable living for others. That, I think, is very untruthful kind of practice. You have to take sides of that. Across the gate, you have to identify that person. You have to stick on to, that's going to be longer probably. That journey is going to take longer, these things. Can I answer you using one anecdote, There's a poem which talks about Road to Ithaca. Road to Ithaca is a small poem written by a Greek poet called Kavafi. It talks about journey. The boy actually, like the boy in Alchemist, he goes to the landscapes of Egypt. That boy, young boy, goes to the landscape. The author actually, the poet asks him, the poet has certain, the boy is perplexed, confused, and the poet urges him to go on forward. He asks the young boy to inhale the fragrance of oriental perfumes, In Kerala, we call it oud. Inhale the fragrance of oriental perfumes, which you will never find elsewhere in the world. Going through the streets of Egypt. Talk to the Sufi saints on the way, because you can enlarge your horizons of knowledge. But finally, when you reach Ithaca might disappoint you. Finally, when you reach Ithaca might disappoint you. But be clear about one thing. Ithaca has given you a journey too great for words. This is the advice that I want to give you. It's a far distant dream. You have the confidence. You fill yourself with positiveness. You can move mountains. I'm telling you, you can move mountains. You can change the system. With your personal experience in architecture, I believe that slowly the systems will change. Have that confidence, have that smile always. Thank you.
Good evening, sir and ma'am. I'm from Amrita School of Architecture. So I have a question. So as sir mentioned that architecture is more about experiential thing. It's not just about construction, it's more about experiential. Even just now sir explained an example of it. So how do you think it should be included in the curriculum and even in the future projects of us? Like how could we even implement the experiential elements? How could it be possible by us?
Yes, my teaching career started in Delhi at SPA. So since then, been so-called teacher. But like the way J. Krishnamurti says, I don't believe to be called as a teacher. Anyway. One of the paradox of schools of architecture, possibly in India, I must have been to at least 70, 80 schools on some pretext or the other. Don't know in other places, but the architecture that you are mentioning as experiential, the architecture that we are supposedly be studying, we study architecture, quote unquote, we study architecture inside the four walls of a studio. But the real architecture that we should be studying is outside the four walls of a studio. There's a paradox which is very difficult to break away. If you look at participatory modes of learning, if you look at hands-on modes, if you look at other modes of learning, for that matter, much about architecture can be learnt just by having very, very frequent walk into buildings, stand there, analyze them, come back, make assignments out of that. You may remember some of the assignments we used to have. And whenever we went out of, she is now with MES Kuttipuram, and I used to go there for the Masters in Sustainability program. And most of the things that we did were participatory. We never went with any curriculum there. Chitra was saying about making a difference to the schools. I don't think I made much difference in most places where I was, but in MES, yes, there was a difference we made. No doubt about it. So because, we had the freedom to do what we wanted to do. The principal, Prasanna ma'am, she said, do what you want to do, she said. That's it. That's where it all begins from. But as long as we are bound by the four walls inside, we'll forget and we'll never know what is happening outside the four walls.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Chitra ma'am, Shankar sir, and Satya sir. We thank you for this enlightening talk and also for
All right. Just a last question I may. Good evening, all of you. Thank you so much for such a beautiful thought. Unlike almost all others, I am not from architect. I'm a marine engineer by profession, and I hold my master's in psychology and other field. Just to explore, I came what's happening in the other field like architect, because just wanted to have deep insight what is happening in the other domains. So, ma'am, when you talked about the government policies and scalability, probably I may be wrong. Probably you can give it a little further thought. We can deliberate upon. Don't you think that scalability can also be coming through because like we are residing in a place in a country where most of the revenues, be it FMCG or housing or any other field, it is coming from the lower middle class or middle class. So I do understand because I am working for the central government. So I do understand there are constraints when it comes to the policy, when it comes to the construction, what you are telling about the FQRs and everything. But when it comes to the architecture, because I hail from Rajasthan, so in times like not before, I'm just decades back or so, the sustainable, the stone, mud, lime, mortars, and everything, it used to be for the lower middle class. For the middle class. Now the things are turning other way around. So if we are going for the, when we're talking about the scalability, can't we have through, the projects, what sir was talking about, say low cost project in a longer run so that it can gain the popularity. People will not be having a fear that if we are going for this sort of construction, then probably I'll end up drilling a hole in my pockets. That to be without knowing about the longevity and everything. So can we deliberate little bit on that? About costing part, I'm asking that through that, can we achieve the sustainability? Like in Maruti, probably most of the people in India are not going for the Rolls Royce or, but Maruti has rightly tapped upon. So that way, can the architecture grow in long term through costing?
Yeah, through costing, and that's why you have more of RCC frame and concrete block and cement buildings because they are cheaper than stone and lime buildings. That's the sad part. The manufactured materials are cheaper in cost.
Ma'am, but for the northern part in the country,
Yes.
like compared to the cement and other conventional materials, the sustainable materials are still within the range. It's more of a consultancy. It's more of a consultancy and the labor rather than the cost of the material itself. This is what is happening in the northern part of the India. I'm not much aware about the Bangalore and the Kerala and this part, but
Yeah, it's the same. So yes, the cost of material is not the stone in Jaipur or the lime, working with lime. The cost of material is probably same as the other material, the conventional material. It cannot be cheaper. It's not cheaper. And yes, the cost of making, the labor is higher. So the total cost comes higher of the unit which you want to make.
With due apologies to Madam, let me tell you this. We actually are trying to put in the mainframe because of 4 reasons. One, the most important reason being the cost efficiency of the material and the final process. Unless it is cost efficient, we will not be able to promote it, especially for the people to whom we are trying to reach. Who are we trying to address through? It's the middle class people, it's the poor sections of society. Unless whatever you talk about reaches them through cost efficiency, resource efficiency, energy efficiency, eco-sensitivity, insulation, whatever you talk about in terms of sustainability, it cannot be promoted. I promote building materials because it is sustainable and it is low cost. I should tell you this because I don't think anybody else in the world have done, in the world, I make a tall statement, but I know it. I've done as many mud buildings as I have done in my life. The largest earth building in the world, in the contemporary world, was done by me. We are talking about huge area, 600,000 square feet in Bangladesh, the floodplains of Bangladesh. I've done 10,000s of buildings in mud. But having said that, I am still trying to promote it because of its cost efficiency, eco-sensitivity, energy efficiency, and resilience, and disaster mitigant properties, and all that thing. That is very critical for an Indian landscape. So that is why I am promoting this material. Cost efficiency is definitely important. And, you should take a stand against what I call as anti-social materials called cement and steel. We cannot, at least we should try to optimize the use of cement and steel by looking at mainstreaming materials like mud, etc., etc. It's a political question that needs to be addressed, but we are in that fight front. We are on that battlefront.
We'll have to wind up the session right now. Thank you for a very insightful talk, looking at it critically, analyzing both the positives and negatives, and yet understanding that earth architecture is relevant as long as it comes from the surroundings and as long as we use it judiciously, it builds resource efficiency.